There's a peace in my life now, a quiet hum that settles deep in my chest. It's the feeling of finally being seen, not by the people I spent decades trying to impress, but by myself. And by these incredible kids I get to work with. It took me 27 years and a very expensive car to get here, but I wouldn't trade that journey for anything. For most of my life, Caleb, was background noise in my own family. My sister, Savannah, who's 2 years older than me, she was always the star. The golden child, you know? The one my parents, Mom and Dad, actually wanted to talk about at dinner parties. I remember when Savannah graduated college. My parents threw her this huge party, 200 guests, a live band, the whole 9 yards. 2 years later, I graduated with honors in computer science, and all I got was a text from Mom that said, "Congrats," with a thumbs up emoji. Dad promised we'd celebrate later, but later never came. Savannah announced she was getting promoted at her marketing firm that same week, and just like that, my moment vanished. I learned early on that my achievements were always just timing issues, always overshadowed by whatever Savannah was doing. When I landed my first job at a tech startup in Nashville, making pretty decent money, the first thing my parents asked was if I could help pay for Savannah's destination bachelorette party in New Orleans. I was 23, barely making rent in my cramped apartment, but somehow I was supposed to fund my sister's 3rd trip that year. I said no. Mom gave me the silent treatment for a month. That's when I started really looking into cryptocurrency. It wasn't because I was some tech bro trying to get rich quick. It was deeper than that. I desperately needed a way out of this cycle where I was always expected to give, but never celebrated. I started small, just soaking up everything I could about blockchain, joining online communities, making tiny investments with whatever I had left after bills. My parents, of course, thought it was idiotic. "That's not real money, Caleb," Dad would say, usually right before launching into another story about Savannah's latest win at work. Mom would add, "You're wasting your time with internet funny money," shaking her head like I'd just announced I was joining a cult. They never asked what I was actually doing. Never showed an ounce of curiosity about the technology or why I believed in it. They just dismissed it because it wasn't a traditional corporate ladder, like Savannah's. Then, I met Layla at a blockchain conference in Boise. She was an architect who'd ventured into NFT art, and we just clicked. We bonded over being the black sheep in our families, the ones who chose the unconventional paths. We dated for a year, and then I proposed. When I told my parents I was getting engaged, Mom's first response was, "Oh, that's nice," and then immediately, "Did you hear Savannah might make senior director?" I should have seen the warning signs right then, but I was still clinging to this hope that, just this once, they'd show up for me. Layla and I planned a small wedding. Nothing extravagant, just 40 people at a beautiful vineyard outside Nashville. I personally called my parents 3 times to confirm. Sent them the invitation with a handwritten note. Even offered to pay for their hotel room. Every single time, they said yes. Told me they wouldn't miss it, that they were proud of me. Then, the week before the wedding, Savannah called them in a panic. Food poisoning from some restaurant. My parents lived 2 hours from me, but only 20 minutes from Savannah. And somehow, they decided that my 29-year-old sister, who had a husband, needed both of them to nurse her through a stomach bug. The wedding day dawned, a perfect Saturday in October, sunny and 75 degrees. I stood at the altar, scanning the crowd for my parents' faces. The ceremony was supposed to start at 4, but I asked the officiant to wait 15 minutes, then 20, then 30. Layla squeezed my hand and whispered, "They're not coming, are they?" And something just broke inside my chest. I don't think it ever fully healed. We started the ceremony with 2 empty seats in the front row, reserved for my parents, with little name cards that mocked me every time I glanced at them. My phone buzzed during the vows. Afterward, I checked it. A group text from Mom, sent to both me and Savannah, just said, "Sorry we couldn't make it. Savannah really needed us. Hope you understand. Congratulations." No phone call, no personal message. Just a generic text that included my sister in the conversation. I found out later from Savannah's husband that she'd been feeling better by Friday night and spent Saturday watching movies on the couch while my parents fussed over her, making soup and fluffing pillows for a grown woman who was perfectly capable of taking care of herself. Something fundamentally shifted in me that night during the reception. As I danced with Layla and celebrated with friends who actually showed up, I realized I'd spent my entire life waiting for my parents to see me, to value me, to treat my accomplishments as worth their time. I was done waiting. I stopped calling them. Stopped responding to group texts. Stopped showing up to family dinners where I'd just sit quietly while everyone dissected Savannah's life. My crypto investments started paying off in ways I hadn't expected. Small gains turned into bigger ones as I learned to read markets and make smarter choices. I got promoted at my tech job, started doing blockchain consulting on the side, and within 2 years, I'd saved enough to make a down payment on something I'd always wanted. I bought a Porsche 911. Guards red. The kind of car I'd dreamed about since I was a kid, watching them flash past on the highway. I didn't buy it to show off or to prove anything to anyone. I bought it because I could. Because I'd earned it. Because, for once, I wanted something beautiful that was undeniably mine. I posted a photo on Instagram, just me leaning against the hood in a parking garage, caption reading, "Hard work pays off," with a location tag from downtown Nashville. I wasn't thinking about my parents when I posted it. Honestly, I'd forgotten they even followed me. 3 days later, my phone rang. Mom's number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Caleb," she said, her voice bright and cheerful, like we talked every day. "We need to talk." She didn't ask how I was. Didn't mention missing my wedding or the 2 years of silence. "Family meeting tomorrow," she announced, like she was inviting me to a parade. "Your father and I need to discuss something important with you and Savannah. Can you come to the house around 2? I sat in my car, looking at my reflection in the rearview mirror, wondering what could possibly be so important after 2 years of nothing. "Sure, Mom," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I'll be there." I had a feeling I knew exactly what this was about. And I was curious enough to show up, to see just how wrong, or right, I was about these people who were supposed to be my parents. I pulled up to their house in the Porsche at exactly 2 p.m. I could see the living room curtains twitch as someone peeked out at the car. Layla sat beside me in the passenger seat. She reached over to squeeze my hand before we got out. "You ready for this?" she asked. I nodded, even though my stomach was doing flips. The front door opened before we even reached the porch, and Mom stood there, arms crossed, her eyes locked on the Porsche in their driveway. "That's quite a car," she said. Not hello. Not how are you. Just a comment about my vehicle. Dad appeared behind her, and Savannah was already sitting on the couch inside, phone in hand, barely looking up when we walked in. The house smelled the same as it always had, like vanilla candles and Mom's obsessive cleaning products. Being back there after 2 years felt surreal, like stepping into a museum of my own disappointing childhood. We all sat down in the living room, that awkward arrangement where my parents took their usual spots on the love seat. Savannah sprawled across the armchair like she owned the place, and Layla and I squeezed onto the remaining couch. Nobody offered us drinks or snacks. Mom asked one quick question about how we were doing, with this fake smile plastered on her face, before immediately moving on. We sat there in silence for a solid 30 seconds before she cleared her throat. Mom started talking about how glad they were I could make it, her voice artificially bright. Dad nodded along like a bobblehead while Savannah finally put her phone down to look at me. They wanted to discuss something exciting, Mom said. I watched her exchange a glance with Savannah that told me everything I needed to know about whose idea this meeting actually was. Savannah had a huge opportunity coming up, a really big deal for her career. And suddenly, my sister was animated in a way she hadn't been when we walked in. She was organizing a major networking event for her firm, bringing in clients from all over the country, potential investors, important people in the marketing and advertising world. She pulled out her phone and started showing me pictures of venues, fancy hotels and conference centers with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows. "It's going to be incredible," she said. "About 150 guests, catered dinner, open bar, live entertainment, the whole thing." I sat there listening, waiting for the part where this involved me. I didn't have to wait long. Mom jumped in, explaining that the venue Savannah wanted was a bit expensive, and while the firm was covering most of it, there was a gap in the budget. She said it like it was totally normal, like, of course I would want to know about Savannah's budget problems. I asked how much of a gap we were talking about, keeping my voice even. Savannah bit her lip before answering, "It's about $25,000. "I know that sounds like a lot," she said quickly, "but this event could make my entire career." She leaned forward with those pleading eyes she'd perfected as a kid, explaining how if this went well, she was looking at a major promotion, maybe even a partnership track. "This is everything I've been working toward." Dad finally spoke up, his voice gruff and authoritative the way it always was when he wanted to sound important. "They could see I was doing well," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the window where my Porsche sat. "That internet money thing worked out for me, and they were happy about that." They really were. Mom nodded enthusiastically, and I almost laughed at how transparent they were being. "Family helps family," she said, using the phrase I'd heard 1,000 times growing up, though it only ever seemed to apply when they wanted something from me. Savannah has always been there for this family. And now she needs support for something really important. I looked at Layla, who was gripping my hand so tight I thought she might break my fingers. Her jaw was clenched as she listened to my parents rewrite history in real time. Savannah had always been there for the family because the family had always been there for her. But nobody seemed to remember that I'd been asking for scraps of attention my whole life. I asked when this event was happening. Savannah's face lit up like I'd already agreed. 6 weeks from now, October 15th, at the Riverside Plaza downtown, she said, already pulling up more photos on her phone. "It's this gorgeous venue right on the water, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It's absolutely perfect." She showed me professional photos of the space, and I had to admit it was beautiful. The kind of place that would photograph well and impress important people. My parents watched me expectantly. I could feel the weight of their anticipation, the assumption that of course I would say yes, because that's what good sons do. They support their sisters, even when their sisters never supported them. "The firm is paying for everything else," Savannah emphasized. "I just need help covering the full venue cost and some of the catering upgrades. That's where the $25,000 comes in." She said it like it was pocket change, like I should be grateful for the opportunity to invest in her success. I sat there for a moment, doing the math in my head, thinking about what $25,000 meant to me versus what my wedding had meant to them. My entire wedding had cost $30,000. And my parents couldn't be bothered to drive 2 hours because Savannah had a stomach ache. The irony was so thick, I could taste it, bitter and metallic on my tongue. "I'll think about it," I finally said. I watched the hope bloom on all 3 of their faces. "I need to check some things, talk to Layla about our finances, but I'll let you know by the end of the week." Mom actually clapped her hands together, and Dad smiled for the first time since we'd arrived. "That's wonderful, Caleb." Mom gushed. "We knew you'd come through. We knew family would matter to you." Savannah jumped up and actually hugged me, which felt bizarre and performative, like she was already celebrating a victory she hadn't earned yet. We left 20 minutes later after enduring more small talk about Savannah's event and exactly 0 questions about our actual lives, our jobs, our plans, anything that mattered to us. As soon as we got in the car, Layla turned to me with wide eyes and tension written all across her face. "Please tell me you're not actually considering this," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. I started the engine, letting the Porsche purr out of the driveway before answering. "Oh, I'm definitely helping with Savannah's event," I told her. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind, until I continued. "Just not in the way they think." I had exactly 6 weeks to plan something that would make my parents understand what they'd been missing all these years. And I knew exactly what I was going to do with that Riverside Plaza venue. That evening, Layla and I sat at our kitchen table for hours, laptops open, talking through every detail of what I wanted to do. She was skeptical at first, worried I was being too petty, too vindictive. But the more we talked about it, the more she understood this wasn't about revenge. It was about making a statement. I'd spent my whole life invisible to these people, and they only saw me now because I had money they wanted. I pulled up the Riverside Plaza website and started making phone calls the next morning. By the end of the week, I'd signed a contract and paid in full for the venue on October 15th, the exact date Savannah needed it. The contract was ironclad, non-refundable, completely in my name. I called Mom on Friday afternoon, like I promised. "I'm in," I told her. "I'll cover the venue." The shriek of joy that came through the phone was almost comical. I could hear her yelling to Dad and Savannah in the background that I'd agreed to help. "I'm so proud of you, Caleb," she said, and I wondered if she could hear how empty those words sounded after 27 years of nothing. "Family means everything," she added. I agreed with her, even though we clearly had very different definitions of what family meant. I hung up and looked at Layla, who was watching me with this mixture of concern and admiration. "No turning back now," she said. I smiled for the first time in days, a real, genuine smile that came from somewhere deep in my chest. "Good," I said, "because I'm about to show them exactly what they missed out on." The 6 weeks flew by in a blur of planning, phone calls, and careful coordination with people my parents had never met and never would. I kept my communication with my family minimal, just occasional texts confirming that yes, I had the venue secured. Yes, everything was on track. Yes, Savannah's event would be unforgettable. Mom called me twice to gush about how proud she was, how this really meant so much to Savannah, how family was finally coming together the way it should. I let her talk, made agreeable sounds, and continued planning something completely different than what she imagined. Layla helped me reach out to organizations across Nashville, making connections with foster care agencies through Child Protective Services, youth mentorship programs, and local charities that worked with kids who'd aged out of the system. The more research we did, the more I realized how many children were living the way I'd felt my entire life, invisible and forgotten. Except their situation was infinitely worse, because they didn't even have the basic security of a home that pretended to care. I'd felt invisible in a house full of people. These kids were actually invisible to a system that was supposed to protect them. By the time October 15th rolled around, everything was in place. I probably made 300 phone calls to pull it all together. The morning of the event, Savannah texted me, asking what time I'd arrive at Riverside Plaza. I told her I'd be there early to make sure everything was set up properly. She sent back a string of heart emojis and exclamation points, completely oblivious to what was coming. I arrived at the venue at 9 a.m. with Layla and a team of coordinators I'd hired. We started transforming the space into something beautiful. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Nashville let in perfect morning light. We decorated with bright colors, banners that read, "You Matter," and huge letters across the walls that proclaimed, "Every kid deserves to be seen." We set up tables with information about foster care programs, mentorship opportunities, and scholarship funds I personally established for kids aging out of the system. The catering company arrived with food, not fancy hors d'oeuvres for corporate executives, but pizza, burgers, and desserts that actual kids would enjoy. Local news crews started showing up around 11 a.m., 3 different stations I'd personally invited to cover this charity event for foster youth. They began setting up cameras and interviewing the organizers about the day's purpose. I'd reached out to them weeks ago with a press release about a major donation and awareness event, and they jumped at the story because feel-good news about helping kids always played well. Around noon, the kids started arriving, about 80 of them from various programs around the city, anywhere from 13 to 21 years old. Kids who were currently in foster care or who'd recently aged out and were trying to navigate life alone. They walked in tentatively at first, unsure about this fancy venue and why they'd been invited. But within minutes, they were exploring the space, loading up plates with food, and talking to the mentors and volunteers we'd brought in. I stood near the entrance, watching them, and something settled in my chest that felt like purpose, like maybe all those years of being invisible had led me to this moment where I could help other invisible people actually be seen. The energy in the room was incredible. Kids laughing and asking questions, volunteers explaining programs that could help them. Cameras capturing genuine moments of connection and hope. At 1:30 p.m., exactly when Savannah's corporate networking event was supposed to start, my parents and sister arrived outside in Dad's car. I watched through those floor-to-ceiling windows as they pulled up to the valet. Mom in a designer dress, Dad in his best suit, and Savannah looking absolutely stunning in what was probably a $1,000 outfit. They walked toward the entrance, expecting to see business executives and cocktail waiters. Instead, they found an event coordinator I'd hired who politely informed them that today's event was private and they weren't on the guest list. I walked outside to meet them. The look on Savannah's face was something I'll never forget, confusion mixed with rising panic. "Caleb, what's going on?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Why are there news cameras here? Why does it say Foster Youth Event on that banner?" My parents stood behind her, looking equally confused. Mom grabbed my arm with this desperate grip. "Where are Savannah's clients?" she demanded. "What happened to the networking event?" I pulled out my phone and showed them the receipt for the venue, my name on the booking, my credit card charge for the full amount. "I booked this venue exactly like I said I would," I told them calmly. "I just never said what I was booking it for." Savannah's face went white. She started scrolling through her phone frantically, probably realizing she had 150 corporate guests about to show up with nowhere to go. "You're ruining my career," she screamed, loud enough that a few people inside turned to look through the windows. "How could you do this to me? To our family?" Dad stepped forward, his chest puffed out, trying to intimidate me the way he had when I was a kid. "This is unacceptable," he said, his voice deep and authoritative. "You will fix this right now." But I wasn't a kid anymore. And I didn't need their approval or their love. "Do you remember my wedding?" I asked quietly. All three of them froze. 40 people showed up to watch me marry the woman I love. "And you weren't there because Savannah had a stomach ache." My voice stayed calm, but I felt everything I'd been holding for 2 years rising to the surface. "My whole life, I've been invisible to you. Every achievement ignored, every milestone forgotten. Every time I needed support, you were too busy with Savannah's life." Mom tried to interrupt, but I kept going. "You called me after 2 years of silence because you saw a car on Instagram. Not because you missed me, not because you were sorry, but because you wanted money." I gestured toward the building behind me, where kids were laughing and eating and finally being celebrated. These kids know what it feels like to be invisible. And I'm not going to let them feel that way today. A news reporter had wandered outside and was filming this entire confrontation. Mom noticed the camera at the same time I did. She immediately tried to compose herself, smoothing her dress and forcing a smile, but it was too late. "We're very proud of Caleb's charitable work," she said loudly for the camera, and I almost laughed at the performance. Savannah was crying now, mascara running down her face, her phone ringing nonstop with confused clients, her big career moment completely destroyed. "I hate you," she spat at me. Honestly, it hurt less than I expected, because I'd stopped caring about her opinion years ago. "You wanted a family contribution," I said, looking at all three of them. "Well, I contributed to kids who actually need it. Kids who deserve to be seen." I pulled an envelope from my jacket pocket and handed it to Mom. Inside is information about the scholarship fund I established in my name, $50,000 for kids aging out of foster care. Her hands shook as she opened it. I watched her face process that I just donated twice what Savannah had asked for, to complete strangers. "You could have been part of this," I told them. "You could have been part of my life, my success, my happiness. But you chose Savannah every single time." Dad tried one more time to assert control, demanding I apologize and make this right, but I was already walking away. I'm moving to Boise next month. I called back over my shoulder. Layla got a job offer there, and we're starting fresh. So you don't have to worry about me asking you for anything ever again. I walked back into that venue, full of kids who deserve better. I spent the rest of the afternoon talking to them about cryptocurrency, about taking unconventional paths, about how being invisible doesn't mean you're worthless. The local news ran the story that night, leading with heartwarming footage of the charity event and ending with 30 seconds of Mom's fake proclamation of pride, which internet commenters immediately saw through and criticized. Savannah's firm apparently scrambled to relocate her networking event to a hotel conference room, but half the clients didn't get the message, and the whole thing was a disaster that cost her the promotion she'd been chasing. 3 months later, Layla and I are settled in Boise, and I've started a nonprofit that connects foster youth with mentors in the tech industry. My parents sent one email after the event, a long, rambling message about how I'd embarrassed them and destroyed Savannah's career, and they hoped I was happy with myself. I never responded, because there was nothing left to say. Sometimes Layla asks if I regret it, if I wish I'd handled things differently. But honestly, I've never felt more at peace. I spent 27 years trying to be seen by people who were determined not to look at me. And now I spend my time helping kids who just need one person to notice they exist. My Instagram is full of photos from mentorship events and scholarship ceremonies, real accomplishments with real impact. My parents still follow me, but they never like or comment. Last week, one of the kids from that October event messaged me, saying he'd just gotten accepted to college with a full scholarship. Reading that message meant more than any congratulations from my parents ever could have. I'm not invisible anymore. Not because my family finally sees me, but because I stopped waiting for their validation and started building a life where I actually matter. The Porsche sits in my garage in Boise, and sometimes I take it out for drives through the mountains, windows down, music loud, feeling like the person I always should have been. My phone never rings with calls from home, and that's exactly how I want it. What do you think about this story?